We'll see whether the troops can keep the peace. New Fox polling shows Donald Trump leading Hillary Clinton in several key swing states now. We'll show you the numbers and get to all the day's news this hour. I'm Harris Faulkner in Today for Shepard Smith. After last night's violent demonstrations in Charlotte, the police chief is still refusing to release the video widely, which shows one of his black police officers shooting a black man and killing him. Protesters have demanded to see it, saying it could clear up the wildly different accounts they've heard about how Keith Lamont Scott died. At a news conference today, the chief said Scott's relatives deserve to see it first. But he did offer a few clues about what he saw in that video.
The video does not give me absolute, definitive visual evidence that would confirm that a person is pointing a gun. I did not see that in the videos that I've reviewed.
Okay, so we still understand the video supports the belief that police say he had a weapon, but as you just heard from the chief, was he actually pointing it? Police have said that Keith Scott did have a gun and refused orders to drop it. Relatives and neighbors say he was holding a book, and only a book. Officials in Charlotte are calling for calm tonight. Keith Scott's family also is telling protesters to keep it peaceful. The North Carolina governor has declared a state of emergency, who's talking live moments ago here on Fox News. You saw it. He called in the National Guard. The protests last night began with a peaceful prayer vigil, and then the demonstrations turned violent. Police Chief Putney says 9 people were hurt in that chaos. That includes a man who was critically hurt after somebody shot him. City officials say it was not police who fired at that man. Police say that they arrested dozens of others. And some images now in our slideshow. Here are police officers standing outside a store, apparently damaged during the looting, and there was a lot of that going on. Here's an aerial look at some of the biggest crowds last night. And look at the cloud of tear gas around one police officer. They used it over and over. Here's a man crouched near a pool of blood, as you can see. Protesters kicking the side of a van. We saw all of this live. And this was one of the peaceful demonstrations from yesterday. Students at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte taking part in what they call a die-in protest. We have Fox team coverage. Jonathan Siri has more on the investigation into the shooting. First, let's go to Steve Harrigan, who's live in Charlotte. Steve, many of those images coming about, you were there on the ground last night, and they are still chilling to see, even in freeze form.
That's right, Harris. What we're seeing now really are scenes like this being repeated across downtown Charlotte. That is basically merchants and hotels trying to get ready for what could be another night of possible violence here in Charlotte. They're putting up OSB boards there to try and block those windows. A lot of these windows in the Hyatt Hotel were smashed last night. What police are saying, what they're promising, is a very different attitude tonight towards the protesters. First, there's going to be more manpower. With the state of emergency in effect, that means highway, state police, as well as National Guard will be on the scene. The tactics, too, are going to be different. Police have said they're going to arrest people a lot more than last night. We saw just 40 arrests. If you really take a look at this downtown Trade Street here, it doesn't look like a state of emergency. We have public transport running, cars running, a lot of businesses back open. Of course, that could change once the darkness comes. One of the most concerning parts of the protest occurred on the highway that encircles the city of Charlotte. That's Highway 277. There are actually protesters there stopping cars, sometimes jumping on top of cars. Here's what the police chief had to say today. Motorists who were stopped and attacked by those protesters. Here's what the chief had to say.
We couldn't be as responsive as we needed to be, as quickly as we needed to be, because our resources were being pulled in so many directions. So what we ask you to do is, as soon as you stop, the ideal thing to do is make sure you stay in your vehicle, lock your doors, and help is coming.
Scenes like that, advice like that, certainly terrifying for a lot of people here. When you're attacked in your car, just lock the doors and stay inside. Help is on the way. It looks like, though, for tonight, more help will be on the way, Harris.
How do these protests, in your experience, because I know you've been to both, compare to some of the toughest ones that we saw, like in Ferguson?
Well, we've heard a lot of comparisons to Ferguson, saying this is Ferguson all over again, but I think there are some real differences here. The protesters last night seemed to be much more skilled, organized, even professional than what we saw in Ferguson. They were ready for the tear gas. They were prepared with masks, and the tear gas and the flash grenades really didn't do much to get them off the street. It was this 4-block area, really, which took the police about 4 hours to clear. They were much more skilled and ready to really battle police. Second, the neighborhood where they chose to make their stand, where they chose to make their attacks, a wealthy neighborhood. In Ferguson, we just saw at the scene of the crime, at where black businesses were being burned and torched. Here we saw, Ritz-Carlton hotels and shopping malls targeted instead with the violence. And finally, the media landscape has changed a lot since Ferguson. Now we have protesters really going directly to social media, broadcasting themselves on Facebook, making their own points, really going around mainstream media. So whenever anything happens, there's two versions. There's the official version, what the police and the city are saying, the man was holding a gun, and then there's the unofficial version, often on Facebook or somewhere else, saying, no, he was holding a book. We saw that again last night with one of the young African-American men who was shot and near death now at the protest. Police saying it was a civilian-on-civilian shooting, but a lot of the protesters here, and once again on social media, saying it was the police who shot that man. Two different versions of events, and a very skilled and dedicated, determined protest movement here in Charlotte. Harris, back to you.
Steve, before I let you go, Governor McCrory, we just heard him talk about how he doesn't want to give the numbers of public safety officers that the police chief has asked for, but decidedly a different scene tonight as you're talking about. And something else maybe to consider, the multiple crime scenes that built last night. You had someone being shot, critically wounded. That's a crime scene, all the looting. Real quickly, have you heard them talk about addressing investigations within the protests?
I think they're really trying to get to the bottom of certain events, like who fired the shot that seriously wounded that young man last night. It was a little bit startling to see the small number of police who were out on the street and really the little effect that they had. It was a 4-hour ordeal for them in hot weather, in heavy riot gear, without a lot of replacements. So it was a real back and forth. They did not establish their authority early on. Perhaps we'll see them do that tonight.
With those added numbers. Steve Harrigan, thank you very much. Let's continue our Team Fox coverage now with Jonathan Seri, who's live in Charlotte as well, with more on the investigation into the shooting. And as I just mentioned, police are not releasing the video, but are showing it to the family of the man who was shot. More on that.
Yeah, that's right, Harris. The police chief says that it is a common procedure that if there's someone who feels that they have been wronged in one of these events, as obviously the family of this man does, that they will show them, they'll give them perhaps a little more access to the evidence than the general public. But one of the reasons that they're not ready to widely publicize this video evidence is that there's a good chance we're going to be seeing external organizations conducting their own investigations, whether it's at the state or the federal level, perhaps FBI, perhaps Justice Department civil rights investigation. And so it may not be up to the chief to decide who gets to see the video if all of these organizations are joining in. So that's just one thing that he wanted everyone to consider, Harris.
You know, during the noon hour on Outnumbered today, we showed the 4.5 minutes of prepared remarks that Attorney General Loretta Lynch had. She's now weighing in on what's happened.
She is indeed. She confirmed that that the Justice Department is sending several personnel from their Community Relations Division to advise police in interacting, dealing with the big crowds here, and also perhaps dealing with the big picture, where we go from here. She spoke in general about the importance of local law enforcement departments around the country to build relationships with the communities they serve, to build upon trust. Listen to what she had to say.
One of the most important aspects of that relationship is, of course, trust. We see it frayed, we see it broken in many communities. One of the ways that we've been trying to rebuild that trust is by trying to break down barriers or silos between law enforcement and the community and to get them to rebuild the relationship.
And Harris, when you talk about building relationships with police, we saw an example of that unfold at this business right behind me. This is a family-owned variety store. You can see the police officers out front guarding it, protecting it from additional looters. Well, when police first arrived this morning to take a statement from the owners, once they finish the interview, they help the owners clean up the business and start repairing the damage. Harris?
Jonathan, thank you very much. We'll have more coverage ahead of the violence in North Carolina, and particularly we're going to look at the efforts to calm the tensions. You heard the police chief is calling for more public safety officers, and they'll be doing some more things too. We'll talk about that coming up. And also this story later in the hour. Fox News has confirmed the wife of the man accused of last weekend's bombings on the East Coast is back in the United States after a flight from the United Arab Emirates. What will they be asking her first? We'll report. Stay close. The story developing this hour as we hear more and more of the leadership in Charlotte, North Carolina. So we'll do more now. A city on edge as it steps up security to prepare for what could be another night of big demonstrations, and hopefully not the violence that we saw. Joining us now, John Bussey, associate editor of the Wall Street Journal. Always good to see you. So let's just get down to what you and I were just talking about in the break, and that is, because of all of the bottles thrown and all of the people that now have to show up in force, in police force, the investigation into what triggered this all almost takes a back seat. Sure, they're going to show the family the video, but how are they progressing in that investigation?
Yeah, that's right. We don't know. I mean, they are trying to manage a riot in the city while also progressing on an investigation. And Steve's point earlier was really good. On the one hand, all the technology today helps us very quickly solve a bombing in New York. It can be a very positive thing for us. On the other hand, social media, as he was pointing out, has an entirely different narrative for what's going on than what the police are saying. So that creates additional conflict and additional confusion. It probably won't be until they have a moment to catch their breath, step back, and actually do the analysis they need to do, or have the feds do it, have the Justice Department do it.
So you bring up a beautiful point in that social media in itself, in its raw nature, can give you video and it can give you evidence, but there is a narrative that's emotionally driven that's also the undercurrent there. So
that's right.
Yeah.
It's a conflicting one, and we're seeing it kind of playing out. The implications of that are
and a distraction. I mean, it could be that all of these protests, you know, most of them peaceful, but certainly not what we saw it evolve to last night, are a distraction from what they're all trying to get to, and that's the nugget of truth with that original shooting.
We need to know, was it a gun? Or was it a book?
Look,
was it pointed at the cops, or was it not pointed at the cops?
No. The police chief said it didn't. It looked to him as if he were pointing anything at anybody in particular.
Yeah, but he
now
said,
the question is, was it actually a gun?
Yeah, and he says it was, and the family says it wasn't. So an investigation will determine that for us.
Yeah.
Meantime, our presidential candidates aren't acquitting themselves well.
Before we go there, how about the president in all of this? I asked on social media last night, where is the president this evening? Just out of curiosity, reporter's perspective, this is a huge story that is getting bigger and bigger. A man shot close to death by another
You saw
civilian.
that today. I mean, he's called the governor, and his attorney general, Loretta Lynch, is very much involved with this now. And again, it probably will be the Department of Justice that helps give clarity to some of this, because it's outside of the city. It's not a party to what's going on.
It would just be interesting to see if the president would weigh in. I know that he has in other situations, and say that this was a black police officer and a black man who was shot. And can we talk about the investigation and let the facts come forth? It might be helpful to hear the commander-in-chief say something like that. So
in the meantime, we have Hillary Clinton saying, hey, this has got to stop, but it's in a tweet, but we're not sure what she's referring to. Is she denigrating what the police did, or is she denigrating something else?
What do you think?
It's not clear. And it's again this sort of rush to comment, if not to judgment. Rush to comment. And Mr. Trump, who is in the middle of an outreach to the minority community. He's way behind in the polls with minority voters. He's trying to reach out to them, and his reaction to a situation where we don't know all the facts yet is to say, hey, we got to impose stop and frisk, which was highly controversial with the minority community in New York City, where a court order ended up having to stop it. Was it tremendously successful, as he points out? Well, the data shows that stop and frisk was stopped, and crime has come down since it was stopped. So there's sort of this rush to comment, counsel the people of Charlotte to catch their breath until an investigation can be done.
All right. John Bussey, thank you. We'll be right back. Fox News has confirmed the wife of the man accused of last weekend's bombings in New York City and New Jersey is back in the United States now after a flight from the United Arab Emirates. She left America in June. Investigators say she is cooperating. They hope she can help them understand how her husband became attracted to radical Islam. As of this afternoon, Ahmad Khan Rahami remains unconscious at a New Jersey hospital. Doctors performed many surgeries on him for gunshot wounds following the shootout with police, which led to his capture on Monday. Rahami faces state charges of attempting to murder police officers, as well as now federal terrorism charges. New surveillance video. Take a look at this. It shows the moments after the bomb blew up in Manhattan's Chelsea neighborhood Saturday night. Look at the thick smoke, the people running. Look at the person there in the wheelchair. I mean, everybody trying to get away. Meanwhile, more disturbing details are emerging about the missed opportunities involving Rahami in the years leading up to the bombings. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live for us in Washington. Catherine, the list grows longer of those red flags.
Well, it does here. As the FBI investigated Rahami after a domestic dispute in August 2014 when he stabbed his brother, punched his sister in the face amid allegations that he was getting radicalized. And a law enforcement source says Rahami got secondary screening at the airport earlier that same year when he returned from a trip to Pakistan and Afghanistan. This information was plugged into a federal database that can be accessed by multiple agencies, and the information was also shared with the FBI at that time. Now, you just mentioned his wife. We know that she left the U.S. in June of this year. It's worth noting that is the same month Rahami began buying bomb parts online for the plot. Asia Rahami is now back in the U.S. and cooperating, and while it's been widely reported that she is from Pakistan, Fox News this afternoon got this statement from Pakistan's Foreign Office that says otherwise. It had been reported that his wife is a Pakistani. This information is incorrect. According to the preliminary information gathered, she is also an Afghan national born in Kabul in 1991. These matters are in the domain of the Ministry of Information. And of course, we are asking the FBI if they can help clarify whether she's an Afghan or a Pakistani, Harris.
Well, and, you know, just to try to understand why this is so important, it does have to do with the vetting process, I would imagine. Shouldn't we be able to quickly know that information if she spent some time here?
Well, what we got from that statement from Pakistan's Foreign Office is they said that she's like a lot of Afghans who kind of travel back and forth across the border. There are several thousand Afghan refugees, if you will, that are living in the Quetta area. So they describe that as not being unusual. So we may have a situation, in fact, where the wife is an Afghan and not Pakistani. And then just a final note about these images that we first brought you yesterday. These are the images from the suspect Rahami's journal. And it's now clear when you look at them that he was super amped up, if you will, on this jihadist propaganda. He was a voracious consumer of the violence that was peddled by al-Qaeda and ISIS. And when you read this, it's really like his martyrdom statement. On one page in particular, Rahami writes about the Marine charity run in New Jersey Saturday where a pipe bomb detonated prematurely. And he vows that bombs and pressure cookers in the streets, that is what he will do. And he talks about disrupting the race. A final note, Rahami also writes about this ISIS leader, Adnani. This is someone who was killed during an August airstrike. And also in an audio tape before his death, Adnani urged followers to kill at home and not to travel to Syria.
The new threat we're facing, and as the ISIS spokesman, calling upon people to attack in the homeland, to attack in the United States. Don't no longer come to Syria, but attack where you are in the United States and kill Americans in their backyard.
We've got into this a little bit yesterday, but it's really worth emphasizing that in that 13-page criminal complaint that lays out the evidence against Rahami for the charges, there is not one single reference to ISIS, which seems to be a pretty significant omission because it has the effect of essentially whitewashing his ISIS sympathies. And that's important because that would make it the latest case in this country where we've seen someone inspired by the group in Iraq and Syria, Harris.
Well, and just talking about the texture of their message and how strong it is with these people who become radicalized. It's worth noting it because you've got to try to understand it. Why would they whitewash it?
Well, why leave that out and put in everything else about Al-Qaeda? And if you actually look at the notebook, and you can look at that online at foxnews.com, you can see that they had to skip over that section of the diary in order to strike it. It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know why you wouldn't include it when you include everything else, but that's on them.
It's part of the reporting. We'll get to it as it breaks. We appreciate you digging deeper into it with us. Thank you very much. Donald Trump says America desperately needs unity. He talked about the violence in Charlotte during an event in Pittsburgh earlier today. Watch.
We honor and recognize the right of all Americans to peacefully assemble, protest, and demonstrate. But there is no right to engage in violent disruption or to threaten the public safety and peace of others. The violence against our citizens and our law enforcement must be brought to a very rapid end.
And earlier in the day, he told Fox News police in high crime areas should use a program called Stop and Frisk. He later said he just meant Chicago only. New York City police used the tactic of stopping, questioning, and frisking suspects until a federal judge ruled it was unconstitutional. Supporters say it helped save lives in minority communities, but New York police reported a drop in crime after they cut down on those stops. Now let's go to some swing state news. And in fact, where the unrest has been happening in the state of North Carolina, a Fox News poll shows, look at this, Donald Trump is leading Hillary Clinton by 5 points in that battleground state, 45-40 among likely voters. Now, look what happens when you add in Libertarian nominee Gary Johnson, who has 6%. Green Party candidate Jill Stein, not on the ballot in North Carolina. Carl Cameron is live in Chester Township, Pennsylvania. That's right outside Philadelphia. And Trump has a rally scheduled there tonight. Carl, good to see you.
Hi, Harris. Donald Trump is making an emphasis on being tough on law and order, making sure that he cracks down on crime. And these latest shootings and the riots that have ensued have most definitely caught his attention. His suggestion about whether or not to do stop and frisk, which was originally called Stop, Question, and Frisk in New York City, has already engendered a certain amount of criticism. The White House says it's not one of the solutions that the administration is looking at. Democrats point out to that federal judge in New York in 2013 who decided that it was unconstitutional, and that at that point it was formally stopped. But the chief of police back in the day, Mike Kelly, was very aggressively winding it down in the belief that the numbers were actually improving and that crime was less frequent and there were fewer people in jail when they stopped the stop and frisk process. Trump argues that what's happening in the U.S. is a national and, in fact, an international disgrace with the rest of the world watching. Listen.
Our country looks bad to the world, especially when we are supposed to be the world's leader. How can we lead when we can't even control our own cities?
What his aides say is that while he was speaking specifically about Chicago yesterday, and many reporters have suggested that he was proposing something nationwide, that is not the case. That what Trump is saying is that a city like Chicago should have something that is tailor-made locally, specifically within the state laws and for that community, but that there should be an increased police presence, and it's quite different than some sort of a national stop and frisk program, Harris.
Well, what did Trump have to say about energy in western Pennsylvania? Because I know he talked about that, too.
Sure. Yeah, well, today he spoke to the 2016 Shale Insight Conference, which is all about the Marcellus Shale Field, a massive area land in Pennsylvania and northwest Virginia, and it has tremendous amounts of natural gas and shale coal that can derive oil and other fossil fuels. Today, in speaking to a group that's obviously involved in that and very concerned about the economy and jobs, he basically argued that his is an all-of-the-above energy policy that will boost these types of industries by deregulation, and Hillary Clinton, on the other hand, he says, would essentially squash them out of business. Listen.
She's not only declared war on the miners, but on all oil and natural gas production. It's war, which supports 10 million jobs in the United States. And you people know it's war.
Aston, right? And so tough words from Donald Trump in a key battleground state, Pennsylvania, one of the four that his aides have said he's got to win. Ohio, Florida, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. Harris.
Carl, real quickly, I heard Donald Trump say at one point, I don't know which state he was talking about, but he said it was like I was running unopposed when you look at the polls.
Pennsylvania. He was very proud of his primary victory here, but he knows it's going to be very tough in the general.
Yeah, he got a laugh from the crowd on that, too. Carl Cameron, always good to see you. Thank you. So far, no reaction today from Hillary Clinton to last night's violent protests in Charlotte. That's today. Yesterday, she called the recent police shootings in Charlotte and Tulsa, Oklahoma, unbearable, saying, quote, too many people are dead who shouldn't be, end quote. The Clinton campaign is off the trail today, getting ready for her first face-off with Donald Trump just 4 days away. And campaign officials say the biggest problem they're facing, preparing for, is, quote, two different Trumps who could show up at the debate stage. Jennifer Griffin is live near Clinton's home in Chappaqua, New York. And Jennifer, she had Tuesday off. She's taken the day off. She's really getting ready. I guess that's a day for each type of Trump she thinks she'll see.
That's right. In fact, Harris, she, as you mentioned, she has not commented today on the riots in Charlotte. She has in recent days, but aides say that we could hear from her sometime later tonight. Today, we heard from her running mate, Tim Kaine, who is campaigning for her out in Nevada. Here's what he said.
There is a need to build better bridges between law enforcement and the communities they serve. Hillary and I understand that. We want to invest in training that will strengthen relationships.
Clinton has tried to walk a fine line between showing support for the African-American victims of some of these recent police shootings and also showing support for the good police officers who are doing very difficult work. She recognized that yesterday when she spoke in Florida. Harris.
I always like to figure out how they prepare for something that, I mean, really, since you think it's going to go two divergent directions, what do you do? So what is that prep looking like?
Well, one of the biggest secrets so far, it's almost as big as when she chose her running mate, is who is standing in and playing Donald Trump in these mock preparatory debates. The campaign will not say who it is. They say they have ruled out that it was Al Franken. I asked her communications director, Jen Palmieri, that yesterday. They did say that they are preparing for two Donald Trumps, one who is genteel and coy and another who is aggressive and at times gets angry. Here's how Jen Palmieri described how they're preparing.
These next three debates will be the three most important moments of the general election. We expect they're going to have a huge audience, and you just really want to have put a lot of, at least how she approaches these things, she wants to put a lot of thought into it.
I asked her campaign whether they are concerned about her being off the trail for so long, but they said it would be diminishing returns campaigning in these days, better to prepare for this debate on Monday, which they see as such a key moment. They also said that in the past, Hillary Clinton has gotten much harder questions than her running mate, Donald Trump. They say they hope that the moderators will, in fact check the candidates in real time during the debate. In other words, to stop any of them if they are lying. A clear reference, they think, to her to her opponent, Donald Trump.
Interesting. Nosy Nelly in me wants to know, will we ever know who's playing the role of Donald Trump? We'll see what happens. Thanks,
we'll
Jennifer.
Have to see on Monday.
All right. Well, it's not just North Carolina. New Fox polling shows Donald Trump is leading in two other key swing states. First, let's go to Nevada. Trump is ahead of Hillary Clinton by 3 points among likely voters. And in Ohio, Trump leads Clinton by 5 points among likely voters. No Republican has ever won the White House without winning in Ohio. So an important thing to look at there. Also, voters in the Buckeye State have backed the winning candidate in every single election since 1964. Let's bring in Tom Bavan, co-founder and publisher of Real Clear Politics. Great to see you. Thanks for being here.
You bet. Great to be with you.
All right. So I first of all just want to talk about trends in voting, because it looks like what we saw early on in some of the national polling that you guys were averaging out is now starting to show up in the key battleground states. Does it often turn out like that?
Yeah, usually national polls are sort of a leading indicator of what we end up seeing in the states. And we had seen at the national level this race tightening over the course of the last few weeks. And we've definitely seen that reflected in these battleground state polls. The Fox polls, but other polls as well, have confirmed that Trump has surged and taken the lead in places like Ohio, Iowa, Nevada, North Carolina. He's up by just a tiny little bit in Florida. That race is basically tied. So among those battleground states, Trump has definitely been sort of on the march. And some of the other battleground states, Hillary Clinton's lead has has shrunk, but she's still maintaining leads in some of those other key states like Pennsylvania you mentioned earlier.
Does your polling look at how kind of a deeper dive as to why that is happening? I mean, are you seeing certain polling that suggests exactly what people are answering to?
Sure. I mean, there are a couple of factors involved. In the Fox polls, for example, Donald Trump expanded his lead among independents to 15 to 20 points in these 3 states. Hillary Clinton is also not doing as well with women. She was up only 6 points, I think, in Nevada and 3 in Ohio. So it's a combination of factors. Donald Trump has also consolidated his base a little bit over the last few weeks. So all those things are contributing to his rise in some of these battleground state polls.
Yeah, I always think it's interesting to look at the actual questions that are being asked and how people answer to them. And sometimes you can kind of get an idea of what's turning them on or off about a candidate. Real quickly, these were not just registered voters. These are the people who say they're motivated.
Right. At this point in the campaign, almost every pollster is shifted to a likely voter model. And they'll put a screen on voters, and usually that's the factor is, have you voted in past elections? And if you have, then you're more likely to vote this time around. They also ask people whether, on a scale of 1 to 10, whether they're likely to vote, and those who are 9s and 10s are determined to be likely voters. Anybody less than that is not.